In the name of Allah, the Merciful and Compassionate, sending peace and blessings upon our Prophet, with his unbroken chain back to Imam Ghazali. This is the chapter on a detailed exposition of how to refine character traits.
يقول مثال النفس في علاجها بمحو الرذائل وجلب الفضائل مثال البدن في علاجه بمحو العلل وكسب الصحة له.
The soul, in terms of its treatment, in order to remove blameworthy traits and acquire praiseworthy traits, is analogous to the body in terms of its treatment to remove ailments and acquire good health.
والغالب على أصل المزاج الاعتدال.
The dominant state of man's physical constitution is equilibrium.
وإنما تعتري المعدة المضرة بعوارض الأغذية والأهوية والأحوال.
But harm befalls the intestines through food, air, in one state.
وكل مولود يولد على الفطرة وإنما أبواه يهودانه أو ينصرانه أو يمجسانه.
And every newborn is born in a natural state of fitra, and it is his parents who make him a Jew, Christian, or Magian.
هذه النقطة الأولى.
This is the first point.
وهي أن الأصل في البدن الاعتدال كذلك الأصل في النفس الاعتدال.
Is that the default state of man's physical constitution is equilibrium, and likewise their spiritual state.
وكما يطرأ شأن العلل والأمراض على البدن بسبب ما يتأثر به الإنسان في يومه وليلته وطبيعة غذائه وما يختلط به، كذلك النفس تتأثر بالتنشئة وبالمحيط الذي يحيط بها.
That just as one's physical health is affected by the different circumstances that they're in throughout the day and night, and what they're exposed to, type of food that they eat, and so forth, likewise that one's inner state is affected by its various circumstances.
ليس في ديننا اعتقاد أن الإنسان يولد على الخطيئة.
That we don't believe in original sin.
بل يولد على الفطرة النقية.
That human beings are born pure in the state with a natural disposition.
ولا يخلق البدن في الابتداء كاملا وإنما يكون
The body is not created in its full stature right at the beginning, but rather reaches its maturity and the fullness of its strength through growth.
كذلك النفس تكون قابلة للكمال وإنما تكون بالتربية وتهذيب الأخلاق والتغذي بالعلم.
Likewise, the soul is created with a full capacity to perfection, but actually attains perfection through education, refinement of its moral character, and by being nourished by learning.
هذه النقطة الثانية.
This is the second point.
النقطة الأولى النفس تولد نقية.
The first, pure,
تتلوث
and
ما يخالطها من شؤون الحياة.
And that it can become affected by the various circumstances of life.
النقطة الثانية مع كونها تولد نقية إلا أنها لا تولد كاملة، تولد بحاجة إلى التنشئة نحو الكمال، الترقية.
The second point is that it's not born perfected or completed, that there's a need for growth in order for it to reach its perfection.
تماما كما يولد الجسد صغيرا عاجزا ويحتاج إلى رعاية وتنشئة حتى يكبر، فإذا كبر يحتاج إلى رعاية من نوع آخر، ثم إذا كبر في طور آخر يحتاج إلى رعاية من نوع آخر في نوع الغذاء والدواء والهيئة والملبس والوقاية، كذلك في المعاملة.
Just as the physical body, that it's born in a weak and feeble state, and it needs to be protected, and then it's strengthened, and then it needs to be protected at various stages until it becomes strong. At every stage of human life, that there's a certain protection that must be there for the human body, and there's a certain way that one must dress, there's a certain preservation of one's health, and so forth and so on. Likewise, the same is with the soul.
فالشيخ المتبوع يطبب نفوس المريدين ويعالج قلوب المسترشدين، لا يهجم عليهم بالرياضة والتكاليف ما لم يعرف أخلاقهم وأمراضهم.
The spiritual master who heals the souls of his disciples and treats the hearts of those who seek guidance does so not through giving them an arsenal of spiritual exercises and positions before he comes to know their character and their maladies.
دخل الإمام الغزالي في الإحياء إلى ذكر ربط المسألة بالشيخ مباشرة، لأن السائد عند المتقدمين من الأئمة بل من مجتمعات الأمة السابقة أن مسألة تهذيب النفوس تخصص تزكيتها وترقية أخلاقها. لما كان تخصصا كانوا يعتنون فيه بالرجوع إلى من يتخصص، ولهذا كان السائد أن يكون الإنسان من الأشياخ من يأخذ بيده في توضيح كيفية تهذيب النفس.
And so that Imam Ghazali immediately mentioned the sheikh, the idea of a sheikh in the Ihya al-Ulumuddin, and the reason for this is that during his time that it used to be considered a specialty and an area of specialization, and because it was an area of specialization that people were very concerned about it. They were very prevalent during his time, so that it was a common reference to mention.
الإمام الحداد ولا بد من شيخ تشيخ تسير بسيره إلى الله من أهل النفوس الزكية.
Imam al-Haddad said that, and you must have a sheikh, a guide that leads you upon the path, who he in and of himself has a pure soul.
في زماننا اعترض هذا الأمر مشكلتان.
That people have found two different types of problems. There's two types of problems related to this in our time.
المشكلة الأولى كثرة الأدعياء لمسألة التربية والتزكية والمتمشيخين بغير وجه حق.
The first is the appearance of so many charlatans, those that claiming that they can help purify and refine your character, but they can't.
مما أضعف الثقة في من يؤخذ عنه.
That such that people have lost trust in those that you can really take from.
واللجوء الكثير ممن تصدروا للمشيخة بغير أهلية إلى التعامل مع هذا الموضوع على اعتبار أنه وسيلة لتكثير الأتباع وتوسيع الجاه والنفوذ، وهذا أبعد ما يكون عن السلوك وعن التربية.
And that there's some that have used this position of being a sheikh to have a large number of followers, and that he says this is has nothing to do with being a true sheikh.
الشيخ المربي الصادق المفترض أنه هو قد هذبت نفسه.
That the true sheikh that is training and guiding someone else is that he has to have refined his own self first.
لا نقول بعصمة أحد بعد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، ولكن هناك حد لا ينبغي أن ينزل عنه.
We're not saying that he is, has isma, that he's divinely protected. No one has that after the Prophet ﷺ, but there's a limit that he has to have fulfilled.
لا يتأتى أن يكون مؤهلا لأن يطبب القلوب ويزكي الأنفس ويهذبها ويحسن الأخلاق، وقلبه معلق بالجاه والمكانة والتفاف الناس حوله.
That he's not, he won't have the true qualifications to refine other people's characters if his heart is preoccupied with what people think of him and wanting to become famous.
لأن حب المنزلة بين الناس صنم يعبد من دون الله.
Because that loving to be known amongst people is an idol that is worshipped apart from Allah.
بل هو أصعب من الصنم.
Rather, it's harder to remove from your life than a physical idol.
لأن الصنم الحسي يمكن الاستدلال على مكانه وهدمه.
Because a physical idol that you can find out where it is and you can actually break it.
ولكن هذا الصنم المعنوي عابده لا يدرك أنه يعبده.
But this metaphorical idol, that the one who's worshipping it doesn't realize that they're worshipping it.
كما انتشر من تصدر المشيخة في الدلالة على الطريق وتزكية الأنفس، الكثير من الجهلة الذين لم يعرفوا ما يجب عليهم هم معرفة من أمر دينهم، فكيف سيعلمون غيرهم ويزكون غيرهم.
So a lot of these people that have stepped forth and attempted to refine people's character and to be a sheikh, that many of them are ignorant about the affair of their own deen. So if they're ignorant about their deen, how can they teach someone else?
ما انتشر بينهم من لم يراعي أدب الشريعة فأجاز لنفسه مخالفة الشريعة والعياذ بالله، وهذا نوع من الزندقة. لا أقول أن الشيخ لا يعصي، قلنا أنه غير معصوم، لكن فرق بين من يعصي مهما كانت المعصية وهو يقر فيما بينه وبين الله أنها معصية ويطالب نفسه بالتوبة ويرجع إلى الله، وبين من يرتكبها ويجد لنفسه المبررات.
Or someone that has made it permissible for himself not to follow the sacred law. He says other people have to follow, but I don't. and he says that this is, one of the worst things that you can do. He says, we're not saying that a sheikh is divinely protected. A sheikh could sin, but there's a big difference between someone who says you don't have to follow the law and between someone who makes sins, realizes the sin, and repents for it.
هذه المشكلة الأولى.
This is all related to the first problem.
المشكلة الثانية.
That the second problem.
وجود من يشوش على الناس مفهوم الحاجة إلى المشايخ المربين.
Is those that confuse others into thinking that there's not a need for shuyukh, teachers that can offer spiritual training.
وهي من أمراض زماننا التمرد على كل شيء.
And this is one of the very widespread problems of our time.
الأبناء صاروا يتمردون على الآباء والتلاميذ على المدرسين. عصر التمرد.
And so this is the age of rebellion. That children rebel against their parents, students rebel against their teachers.
وأحيانا يتمرد الكبار على معنى كونهم كبارا، يتمرد الآباء على مفهوم التضحية الذي هو أساس في مهمتهم، ويتمرد الحكام على مفهوم الإنصاف الذي هو الأساس في الصلة بهم، ويتمرد من ينتمي وينسب نفسه إلى العلم على مفهوم القدوة. ثم نستغرب أن يتمرد الجيل الذي بعدنا على معنى الالتزام والارتباط بقيمة الكبار.
And so this rebellion can even be seen for, older people, such that parents have rebelled against their rightful role in the way that they should be raising their children. That some of Muslim leaders have rebelled against their role and have been oppressive in the way that they really should be teaching, they should be treating their citizens. And you find there's people of knowledge that have rebelled against their role to truly be of benefit to the people.
من ظلمة هذا التمرد أن عصرنا عصر التعدي على التخصصات، عدم احترام الاختصاص.
And that one of the dark aspects of this rebellion is that people not recognizing areas of specialization, so that they don't allow for specialization.
فنسمع من لم يتخصص في علم الشريعة والدين يفتي ويتكلم وينقض كلام أحيانا مجمع عليه بين أئمة أهل العلم ويرى نفسه فاهما.
So we find people that have no understanding of the law and they're ignorant, but they will give a fatwa, they'll give a legal opinion, and that they will, rebel against our legal history by doing this, and they don't have the slightest bit of understanding.
ويوصل ذلك للناس على أنه نوع من الانطلاق والقدرة على التعامل مع العصر وحرية العقل والفكر. هذا تهريج.
And then people will say that, this is just a part of our time and that we're free, we have the ability to think and we're free and to think and these type of things. And
عندنا الكتاب والسنة وخلاص، احنا عندنا عقول، ليش نكون ملتزمين بأن نرجع إلى هالاختصاص في الفتوى؟ هذا كهنوت يقول.
He says that we have intellects that, why can't we just go back and derive law from the Quran and the Sunnah? And he says, that this is ridiculous.
وكأنه لم يقرأ قوله تعالى لعلمه الذين يستنبطونه منهم، أي أن هذا اختصاص الذين يستنبطونه منهم.
And so they have no recognition for specialization. And he quoted the verse as if they haven't read the verse that, and those that have known how to extract from among them. Meaning this is a specialization to derive law, and to give legal opinion. And Allah says, ask the people of remembrance if you do not know. Meaning that there's people that have the ability to do this.
الآيات والأحاديث مضطردة في ذلك.
That we find that many verses in the Quran and the Hadith that indicate this.
لكنه الهوى، نسأل الله السلامة والعافية.
But these are people's passions that are driving them.
والاغترار.
And delusion.
وأسوأ من ذلك الدعوة إلى الهوى والاغترار.
And even worse than that is that they're calling to their passion and to they're calling to their passion and to their delusion.
الأسوأ من ذلك ترويج الاغترار والدعاوى بجهل.
And that even worse than that is that they are inciting other people to become deluded and to follow their passions.
تجد واحد لو سألته في مسألة أولية من علم الأصول أو تخريج الفروع على الأصول يتلعثم ولا يعرف معناها، لا يعرف يقرأ عبارتها بطريقة صحيحة، ويتهجم على أبي حنيفة ومالك والشافعي وأحمد وأئمة الهدى ويقول لا أنا مجتهد.
That you ask someone about the most simplest phrase in a book of Islamic legal theory, and not only do they not understand it, they can't even read it properly. And at the same time that they think that they're a mujtahid and can derive law, and they're saying ill things about Imam Abu Hanifa.
في العصر الذي قبلنا مباشرة كان أحد الذين أظهر نفسه على أنه مشتغل بالعلم يكني الإمام الأعظم أبي حنيفة بأبي جيفة، يقول أبو حنيفة أبو جيفة يقول عليه.
That there was someone who, in the generation just before us, that they spoke about Imam Abu Hanifa, and that, which is Abu Hanifa, a beautiful name, and he said they changed his name to Abu Jifa. Jifa is a corpse, a dead carcass.
هذا أتباعه الآن يعتبرونه شيخ كبير.
That this person's students think that he's a great teacher.
سبحان الله، مات في بيت الخلاء وبقي 3 أيام لم يشعر به أحد أنه مات فأخرج جيفة.
That this person actually died in the bathroom and no one realized that he had died. And that when for 3 days he remained inside of there and no one knew, and that they brought him out as a dead corpse.
من يتجرأ على مثل الإمام أبي حنيفة؟
That who could ever say, anything about.
عاد لي وليا فقد آذنته بالحرب، يقول الله في الحديث القدسي الذي في البخاري.
In a divine saying in Sahih Bukhari, that whoever shows enmity to one of my awliya, that I will declare war against him.
سبحان الله، تجد كل الذين يدعون إلى كسر هذا الاختصاص وادعاء أن هذا ليس له وجود في الإسلام وأنه نوع من الكهنوت، تجد هذا الشخص الذي يقول هذا الكلام يحترم كل الاختصاصات الأخرى، لا يتجرأ يتكلم في الطب، لا يتجرأ يتكلم في الهندسة، لا يتجرأ يتكلم في الكيمياء، لا يتجرأ يتكلم في الفيزياء، لا يتجرأ يتكلم في الغذاء، في التغذية الصحية، لمجرد أنه قرأ ونظر فيه، ويجد أنه من حقه أن يتجرأ ليبلغ عن الله سبحانه وتعالى، يوقع عن رب العالمين، يفتي.
So at the same time that you find someone like this that doesn't recognize specialization in the realm of law, is that they recognize every other type of specialization. They recognize, they won't ever say anything about physics, they won't ever say anything about chemistry, they won't ever say anything about medicine, they won't ever even say anything about something related to food. But when it comes to legal rulings, is that you find that they put themselves in a position where just anything goes and they say what they want.
ثم يقول كلاما ويعرضه على الناس على أنه مفاهيم علمية شرعية، عندما يراها أصحاب الاختصاص ينظرون هكذا.
And then he tries to convince other people that this is something that's really related to the sacred law, while the people of specialization who really know are looking at them just in astonishment, like, what is that?
الذي يصعب فيه الرد عليه.
To the extent that you can't even respond to what they're saying.
ماذا تقول؟
What are you going to say?
تخيل واحد يقوم ويقول لا يا جماعة، ما كل ما يقوله أهل الكيمياء صحيح. أنا اكتشفت أن الماء ليس H2O.
What would you say, if someone stood up and said that what the chemists, say is not true, and that, I've discovered something that water is actually not composed of H2O.
لا، الماء عنده H10O.
That water is H3O, it's chemical
قل يا رجل لا، الماء H2O.
And he said, no, water is H2O.
قل لا يا أخي، الماء H10O.
No, water is H10O.
قل يا أخي، المتخصصون في علم الكيمياء علمونا أن الماء H2O.
You say to them, no, that those involved in chemistry told us, the specialist said that it's H2O.
يقول هؤلاء ليسوا بمعصومين، هم رجال ونحن رجال.
And then they say that they're not divinely protected, we're men and they're men.
ألسنا نسمع هم رجال ونحن رجال اليوم في أمور الدين.
We hear this about affairs of the deen, we're men and they're men.
القوم خلطوا بين مفهوم الرجولة ومفهوم الذكورة.
That these people have misunderstood the meanings of true manliness in between being of the gender of the male gender.
هذه مشكلة.
This is a big problem.
على كل، أحد المشايخ هؤلاء المتمشيخين ليسوا بالمشايخ الذي لم يأخذوا عن مشايخ من قبلهم، يقرأ عليه أحد تلاميذه، قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم: المؤمن كيس قطن.
And that in any case, these, he called them that they're not actually a sheikh, that they're attempting to be a sheikh, that when they read, for instance, a hadith that they, with their students, that they said that a believer is a sack of cotton.
فقال المتمشيخ صدق رسول الله.
And then the one who's trying to be, looked like in the guise of a sheikh, said that the Prophet has told the truth.
فقال له تلميذ يا سيد شيخنا ما معنى أن المؤمن كيس قطن؟
And then the student asked the Prophet, what does it mean for the believer to be a sack of cotton?
يا ابني هذا مثال يضربه رسول الله يعني أن المؤمن قلبه طاهر أبيض كلون القطن.
He said that this is a metaphor that our Prophet has given us, is that the believer's heart is white like cotton.
الحقيقة أن العبارة تصحفت.
And that they've actually, he's misread the hadith.
الحديث كيس فطن.
That the believer is kayyis and fatan. That he's
الكيس قرئت كيس.
That he read kayyis, kis.
والفطن زادت عنده نقطة فقرأها قطن.
And so that he added another dot on top of one of the letters. Instead of fatan, he read it qutn.
واحد آخر من هؤلاء الذين لا يقول لا ما نرجع للعلماء نحن عندنا عقول مثلهم لاحظوه ذاهب إلى الصلاة يسمعون خشخشة تحت ثوبه ويصلي بالناس عنده صوت جميل في القرآن خلاص يصلي بالناس ويفتي ويخطب فواحد من لديه نصيب من العلم لاحظ أن هذا كل ما يمشي يسمع خشخشة تحت ثوبه من هنا جهة صدره.
So he said that someone else that it's of this opinion that we don't need scholars, we can just go directly to the text ourselves, that as he was walking out to pray that they heard like a sound like rubbing against his chest, and some person noticed this, that when he led the prayer that on his way that he heard the sound rubbing against his chest.
فزاره وقال يا شيخنا يعني أنا أسمع مثل الخشخشة دائما تحت ثوبك ماذا عندك؟
He said that he went to visit him. He said, Sheikh, that I hear this sound always scraping underneath your robe.
قال ما شاء الله بارك الله فيك أنت لاحظت قال نعم.
He says, MashaAllah, alayk, may Allah bless you, you've noticed.
قال أنا أحييت سنة ماتها الناس.
He said that I'm bringing life to a sunnah that people have abandoned. And what is this sunnah?
ففتح عرى وزارير الثوب وأخرج مثل الخيط الحبل معلق به فإذا به فار صغير محنط وسكينة.
And so that he opened up his inside of his robe, and that he was wearing a type of necklace, that there was a mouse on it and a knife.
قال ما هذا؟
He says, what is that?
قال أهل العلم نصوا ويستحب الخروج إلى الصلاة بسكينة وفار.
He says that these scholars have mentioned in the books that it's recommended to go out to prayer with a sakina, with a knife and a far, which is a mouse.
قال ونحن نصلي خلفك الأيام هذه كلها وصلاتك باطلة.
So we've been praying behind you all these days and your prayers invalid.
تحامل نجاسة وتصلي بنا.
He says that you're carrying filth and you're leading us in
قال
prayer.
لا تسيء الظن بها. جاء بالكتاب انظر مكتوب بسكينة وفار.
He says don't have a bad opinion. He brought his book and said, look, it says sakina and far.
قال له يا أجهل الناس هذه بسكينة ووقار.
He says, oh fool, this is sakina wa waqar, tranquility and dignity. You're supposed to go to prayer.
سكينة سكينة.
So sakina, which is tranquility, he read as sakina, which is a knife.
وقار صارت فار.
And waqar, which is dignity, he read as far, which is mouse.
مصيبة.
This is a calamity.
لا أكلمكم عن قصص قديمة فحسب.
He says that I'm not speaking about only these stories.
اختلف بعض أئمة المساجد في سان فرانسيسكو وسان هوزيه عندكم هنا في أمريكا في كاليفورنيا على مواقيت الصلاة.
And that there was a real story that took place in the Bay Area where they differed about the time of prayer.
فاجتمع هؤلاء الأئمة المختلفون.
And so those that differed got together.
وقالوا سنذهب في يوم الشمس فيه مشرقة ونتأكد من ضبط الأوقات وكل واحد يأتي بحجته.
And that we'll go when the sun is shining, and everyone brings their proof to determine the prayer direction.
فوجئوا بالشيخ هذا اللي عمل الإشكال في مسألة مواقيت الصلاة ويلح على أنهم لا يفهمون وهو الذي يفهم هو متمشيخ. فوجئوا به جاء إلى المكان الذي اتفقوا عليه ومعه غنمة عنزة.
And so that they were surprised that when they actually came to determine the prayer time, is that the sheikh that claimed that he knew and really he wasn't a sheikh at all, he brought a goat with him.
هذا في سان فرانسيسكو حصل.
This is a real story in San Francisco. It happened.
فقالوا له لماذا جئت بهذا يا شيخ؟
And they say, why did you bring the goat? Imam.
قال هذه سنة في ضبط المواقيت أماتها الناس أنا أحيي سنة رسول الله.
The sunnah and the way that we find the prayer time, it's a sunnah that we're reviving.
هي سنة. قالوا كان تعرف مواقيت الصلاة بإقامة عنزة والنظر في ظلها.
And they said that the Prophet used to find the prayer times by an anza, which is a goat, and then he would look at the shadow and determine the prayer time.
قالوا له يا أجهل الناس هي عنزة ليست عنزة.
He said that, foolhardy person, that it's an anaza, which is a staff.
العصا التي في مؤخرتها أو في أسفلها معدن.
So that something that it's a type of stick that has a pointed edge that you could stick in the ground.
اسمها عنزة.
And so that's anaza with two fathas.
هو قرأ العنزة عنزة.
And he thought the anaza was an anza, which is a goat.
فجاء معه بعنزة.
So he actually brought a goat with him.
في سان فرانسيسكو.
In San Francisco.
ليعرف مواقيت الصلاة.
To determine the prayer time.
هذا مضحك لكن أيضا مبكي.
This is makes us laugh, but it also makes us cry.
فإذا كان الناس ما عرفوا قيمة الرجوع إلى أهل الاختصاص في الفتاوى التي هي اختصاص ظاهر وقوي فكيف في شأن التربية والسلوك سبحان الله.
That if people don't know then and appreciate specialization, that how could they not then appreciate the specialization of deriving law from the book and the sunnah?
وأعرف أن بعضكم سيتساءل طيب نحن قد نكون في أماكن لا نعرف فيها الشيوخ الذين يمكن أن نأخذ عنهم ونستعين بهديهم ودلالتهم. سيأتي كلام في فصل آخر عن 4 وسائل أحدها المشايخ و3 بدائل في حال عدم وجود المشايخ لكن الكلام هنا عن منهجية التهذيب.
So some of you might ask then that what do we do then? How do we know who are the true rightly guided teachers so that we can then follow them? And he said that that's coming, that the chapter that we're dealing with now is just dealing with the detailed exposition of the character traits, but there's actually 4 signs of them. And in the case, there's actually 4 different ways that we deal with that.
هنا قال أن الشيخ المتبوع لا يهجم على أخلاق المريد مباشرة بالرياضات القوية وللتهذيب. أولا يعرف ما هي إشكاليته أي التشخيص قبل العلاج.
So that the sheikh, that he doesn't just immediately tell his student what to do, that first of all, that he looks into his state and determines their maladies before he gives them. So he examines them first before he gives them a prescription.
بل ينظر في مرض المريد وحاله وما تحتمله بنيته من الرياضة.
Instead, he looks at the maladies of each disciple and his condition and gives him the spiritual exercises his constitution can take.
فإن كان مبتدئا جاهلا بحدود الشرع فيعلمه أولا الطهارة والصلاة وظواهر العبادات.
If he is a novice who is ignorant of the boundaries of the sacred law, the master will begin by teaching him how to perform ablution, prayer, and outward acts of devotion.
السير إلى الله عز وجل وتهذيب النفوس ورقي الأخلاق لا يكون مع ترك الفرائض.
Because taking a spiritual path and drawing near to Allah will never occur by leaving obligatory acts.
ظهر بين ظهرانين الناس الآن ادعوا أنهم من أهل التصوف والتصوف منهم براء. يقولون المسألة قلبية وفلسفية وروحية وممكن يجلس طول الليل يسهر يستمع إلى الأغاني معه العود ويغني في كلام القوم على أنه يرتقي بذوقه وليس عنده إشكال أن لا يصلي لا ظهر ولا عصر ولا مغرب ولا عشاء ولا فجر ولا يحثون المريدين على ذلك. هذا ضلال بين.
He says that there are Sufis that in reality Sufism have nothing to do with, and these type of people that don't appreciate the sacred law and to think that it's not an obligation upon them to pray or to fast, that they might spend the entire night just listening to poetry recited with a guitar and listening to the music and thinking that this is going to help, that they're, experiencing the meanings of these words and that they don't care whether they pray or not. He says this is complete misguidance.
ونسمع عن شيخات الآن ظهرن عندكم هنا في الغرب شيخة مربية صوفية يعتبرونها كبيرة وهي شعرها مكشوف سرحهم كعشش فوق راسها شيخة دالة على الله.
So we hear now about cases in the West where there's female spiritual guides, female sheikhas that are guiding their students, and people look at her for guidance, and that she doesn't even wear hijab, for instance, and her hair is just exposed.
وتقول لا المسألة أرقى من ذلك.
And she'll say, no, it's not about, the outward, the law, and, how we look. It's a loftier affair than that.
سبحان الله هذا الرقي اللي ما عرفته فاطمة ولا خديجة ولا عائشة.
He says this is an elevated state that I guess Fatima and Aisha didn't know.
الأمر دين.
That this is our deen.
لا بأس أن يكون نوع من التدرج لتأليف قلوب الناس.
That there's nothing wrong with, working with people step by step and helping them.
لا بأس من مراعاة النافرين، تعالوا واجمعوهم على غناء ونشيد وقصيد ومدح، في البداية لا تكلموهم في الصلاة من باب التهيئة لهم، هذه يسموها دعوة.
That there's nothing wrong with accepting people as they are, that encouraging them to come and to listen to good nasheed, and that just overlooking their state, don't force them to pray, but hopefully they'll do it later. This is da'wah.
لكن ليس الأمر أن يكون التصوف بمعزل عن التكاليف الشرعية فيصبح الأمر ثابتا على هذا النحو.
But you can never say that Sufism doesn't go hand in hand with implementing the sacred law. I mean, you can't say that.
كيف هذا؟ كيف أسير إلى الله وأنا أترك ما فرضه الله علي؟ قال لي افعل بالوجوب وأعتبر نفسي قريب منه وأنا مصر على ترك ما أوجبه علي.
That how could I travel on a path to Allah, and by neglecting what He has imposed upon me from obligations? He said this makes no sense. He said if there's an obligation He's imposed upon me, it has to be a part of my path to Him.
فالرجل أو المرأة أي منهما يمكن أن يدل على الله، يمكن أن يربي، يمكن أن يأخذ بأيدي السالكين إلى الله، لكن من خلال الالتزام بالشريعة.
That it's possible for both men and women to be spiritual guides and to help people and facilitate a path for them to draw near to Allah, but it's only done through the sacred law.
ومن الشريعة التدرج مع النافرين لا إشكال.
And that it's from the sacred law is that you work with other people step by step until they implement the deen.
لكن ليس من الدين أبدا أن تجنب الشريعة في السير إلى الله عز وجل.
But it's not from the deen at all to say that you just put the sharia and the sacred law aside.
سئل بعض العارفين بالله قيل له أن هناك من يدعي أنه وصل إلى الله، أنه وصل وبالتالي ما يحتاج إلى الصلاة وإلى الصيام.
One of the righteous was asked that there's a particular individual that's claiming that they've arrived and such that they no longer need to pray or fast.
قال له نعم وصل ولكن إلى سقر.
And he said that yes, he's arrived, but he's arrived to the fire.
هذه شريعة.
This is our law.
الله قال لي صلي.
That Allah has told us to pray.
ولم يرفع عني تكليف الصلاة إلا في إحدى حالتين.
And that there's only two states in which prayer is not an obligation upon you.
فقد العقل أو فقد الحياة.
That when you die or you lose your intellect.
وإذا كان هذا الذي يتساهل في مسألة الصلاة بدعوى أنه يعني في صلاح يبرر بأنه أصبح مجنون، خلاص مجنون لا يصلح يعلم الناس ولا يربيهم.
So he says that if this person who says that they can spiritually train others and that they no longer have to pray, well, in reality,
حالة غياب عن الوعي مع الناس مع الله صار مجنون بالله.
Right, so that they become crazy, if they become insane, and such that they're legal insane. If someone's legal insane, they don't have legal responsibility, but how are they going to teach other people?
أحسن الظن بك مجنون بالله إن شاء الله تمام، لكن مجنون ما يصلح يربي الناس.
He says that we'll have a good opinion of them, yes, that they're insane with their Lord, but they can't teach other people.
يمكن أعتقد أن يكون هناك شخص يشار إليه بأنه مجنون وهو من الصالحين من الأولياء. أنا ممكن أفهم هذا.
That we can say that there's someone that he looks a bit, crazy, that we can say that, okay, we'll have a good opinion that he's from the righteous.
ممكن نراه من الأولياء.
That we can think that he's from the awliya.
الإمام الحافظ ابن أبي الدنيا ألف جزءا أسماء عقلاء المجانين.
And then Imam Al-Hafiz ibn Abi Dunya, that he authored a book that is that is titled The Intellects of the Insane.
لكن يبقى مجانين.
But they remain insane.
أعتقد فيه النور والولاية تبارك به، لكن لا يدل الناس على الله، لا يكون مربي.
That we, seek blessing from them, that we see that they've been granted light, but they can't guide other people.
ولهذا قال أن الشيخ المربي المعلم المزكي للأنفس يقول إذا كان المريد هذا الذي يأتي لا يزال مبتدئا جاهلا بحدود الشرع يعلمه أولا الطهارة، الصلاة، العبادات الظاهرة.
And this is why Imam Ghazali says here about the students, if he is a novice who is ignorant of the boundaries of the sacred law, the master will begin by teaching him how to perform ablution, prayer, and outward acts of devotion.
ويمكن في طريق إعداده لأن يتقبل ذلك أن يتلطف به، يمكن أن يتركه فترة يحضر الذكر ولا يصلي، يحضر الإنشاد ولا يصلي، كنوع من التأليف لا إشكال، لكن المهم أن يكون هذا في الذهن أن أول خطوة حقيقية جادة في السير إلى الله أن يتعلم أحكام دين الله عز وجل فيما هو واجب عليه فيطبقها.
So until that the person is ready to start making the ablution and praying and fasting and so forth, that you can work, there's room there that you can invite them to dhikr and let them listen, and that you don't force them to pray at the first stage, but the first real step in the path is that one recognizes they'll reach a certain point where yes, they're going to then make the ablution and pray and so forth.
ذلك المقصرة في فريضة ستر الرأس وهي فريضة بالإجماع، لا نقول أنها لا مجال لها في السير إلى الله ونقول أنها ليست بفاضلة، بالعكس توجد فضليات منهن أكثر من بعض المنقبات في بعض السلوكيات والأخلاقيات، ليس هذا الكلام عنه، ليس هذا المقصود.
So, and likewise, for instance, a lady that doesn't wear the hijab and doesn't wear the scarf, that the same thing applies. Is that there's room there that one works with them, but for us that we know that there's many women that are more virtuous that don't wear hijab than women that even might wear the niqab and wear the veil.
يوجد من المنقبات من تكذب من تغش من تخدع، ومن متبرجات من لا تكذب ولا تغش ولا تخدع.
That you find women who wear the niqab, the veil, that deceive others, that lie, that do these type of things and cheat, and women that don't even wear hijab, that don't do these things.
في هذه الحالة إذا قارنا كاشفة الرأس التي تصدق ولا تكذب وتؤتمن ولا تخون وتتقن عملها ولا تغش أفضل عند الله من المنقبة التي تكذب وتغش وتخون.
So a woman that doesn't wear hijab, that doesn't lie, that doesn't cheat, that is trustworthy, but she doesn't wear hijab, is better than a woman who wears a niqab, a veil, that lies, cheats, and deceives others.
لا شك أن المتحجبة التي تصدق والتي تستقيم والتي تتقن عملها أفضل من الجميع.
But the best state of all is the sister who wears the hijab, who's sincere, who's trustworthy, and so forth.
الأولى آثمة بكشف رأسها، والثانية آثمة بكذبها وبغشها وبخيانتها.
The first is in a state of sin by not wearing the hijab. The second is in a state of sin by lying and deceiving.
والإثم الثاني أكبر من الأول.
And the second is a greater sin than the first.
ولكن المطلوب ترك الإثمين.
But the whole point is to leave both types of sin.
فلا يصح أيضا أن يقال لا خلاص أنا تقول واحدة أنا غير محجبة وأنا لا أكذب أنا أحسن من تلك المحجبة التي تكذب. لا تحجبي ولا تكذبي. من قال أن الحجاب مرتبط بالكذب؟
And so that for a sister to say that no, I'm better than these other ladies that are wearing the hijab because that I'm sincere and I'm not lying and so forth. But he's saying that what's the relationship between the hijab and lying? That's one thing and that's the other. No, wear the hijab and also, and this is from the plots of shaitan.
نتكلم عن ترويض النفس، نفسك تضحك عليك.
And that I'm speaking about training the soul. That in this case, it's as if your nafs is laughing at you.
الخطوة الأولى الاعتراف.
That the first stage is just to admit.
الذي مقصر في شيء أوجبه الله عليه أقل ما يعمل أن يعترف أن هذا واجب وأنه مقصر.
That the first thing that one does, if they're a shortcoming, something that Allah has made an obligation upon them, is that they admit that.
يدعو الله أن يدفع عنه تقصيره.
And that they pray to Allah that He removes their shortcoming.
ويعمل على مجاهدة نفسه.
And that they work and struggle against their soul.
ورحمة الله تكون قريبة منه.
And then Allah's mercy will be near to them.
لكن واحد مقصر في شيء أوجبه الله عليه ويكابر يقول لا هذا ما هو واجب.
But someone that is a shortcomer in something Allah has made incumbent upon them, but then they say that no, this is not an obligation.
هذا في خطر كبير.
This is actually very dangerous.
وجه الخطر ليس في تركه الواجب.
And that the danger is not in them leaving the obligation
فحسب.
only.
الخطر الأكبر في إنكاره على الله ما أوجبه الله.
The greater issue is that they're denying something that Allah has made an obligation upon them.
أي واحد يقول لا يعني حتى لو أنا غشيت في عملي في شغلي الله يعلم نيتي طيبة.
That someone says that even if I am untrustworthy or I cheat others in my business, but Allah knows my intention, that I have a good intention.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله. والناس الذين تضرروا بالغش.
And what about the people that were affected by your cheating?
الذي يخدع الناس.
And that you've deceived.
في مشاعرهم أو في أمور دنياهم أو في حياتهم ولا يبالي بقيمة مشاعر البشر.
Their feelings and that the affairs of the that they're dealing with, that someone who just doesn't care about a person's emotions.
أو يفتن بين الناس.
And that causes problems between people.
تقول له يا أخي هذا حرام ما يجوز هذا خطر عليك فيما بينك وبين الله.
And that someone says to them that this is prohibited for you to do this. This is a danger for you and your Lord, between you and your Lord, the state between you and your Lord.
لا أصلاً أنتم ما فهمتموني.
And that they say that then you haven't understood me.
لا هذه ليست فتنة.
That this is not I'm not causing problems.
هذا أسلوب مواجهة الحقائق.
This is the way that I'm dealing with reality.
كيف يواجه الحقائق من عود نفسه خداعها.
That how could someone deal with reality that has got themselves used to deceiving others?
النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عرفنا بأن النميمة أو القت هو نقل الكلام بقصد الافتتان.
That our Prophet ﷺ told us about the one who tells people things with the intention of causing problems between people.
تنقل كلام من شخص إلى شخص تعلم أنك إذا نقلته سيوجد فتنة بين الاثنين.
Such that you know that if you convey something to someone else about something that they've said, but your intention is to cause problems between them.
وتعلم أن عدم نقل هذا الكلام لن يترتب عليه ضرر حقيقي.
And that you know that if you don't tell that second person, that there's not going to be any harm that results.
وتصر على أن تنقل الكلام.
But at the same time that you tell them what they said.
وإذا جاء أحد ينصح.
And then if someone comes to give advice.
من حق الطرف الثاني أن يعرف الحقيقة.
And they'll say something like, no, this other people, it's their right to know the truth.
كيف هذا الكلام؟
He says that what's this all about?
النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أخبرنا أن هذه نميمة.
That our Prophet informed us that this is namima, which is calumny or talebearing.
وقال لا يدخل الجنة قتات.
And that our Prophet said is that this person, the talebearer, will never enter into paradise.
ويأتي شخص يريد أن يبرر شهوة نقل الكلام.
And then someone will come and try to justify their desire to tell people things.
بأن هذا نوع من الانتصار للحقيقة.
And that this is somehow, a way of dealing with reality.
تعال انتصر للحقيقة في داخلك أولا.
That you have to have this reality be in your heart, inside of you first.
إذن فمهمة الشيخ أن يراعي التدرج. قال إذا كان المريد يجهل الواجبات يعلمه الواجبات ويوجهه نحو العمل بها أولا.
So then the duty of the sheikh is to take the student step by step, that he needs to learn first the obligatory acts and then move on.
وإن كان مشغولا بحرام أو مقارفا لإثم فيأمره أولا بترك ذلك.
And that if the disciple is occupied with forbidden acts and sin, the master will begin by first enjoining him to leave all of that.
معنى هذا أن أولوية الشيخ في تزكية نفس التلميذ أن يعينه أو يحثه أو يأخذ بيده ليقوم بالواجبات ويترك المحرمات. هذه الأولوية.
So meaning that the greatest priority for the sheikh is that the student fulfill the obligatory acts and leave that which is prohibited.
قد يحتاج في الطريق للوصول إلى ذلك أن يؤخر هذا أو أن يسكت عن هذا مؤقتا وأن يراقبه بوسائل أخرى إلى أن يقبل قلبه على الله. هذه اسمها دعوة وليست تسليك. ليست أخذ بيد مريد، لا يزال إلى الآن ليس بمريد في السير إلى الله، لا يزال مدعو ليقبل في البداية.
There might be a particular stage where the sheikh is silent about something, or that he postpones speaking to him about a particular thing. He says, but this is da'wah. This is an attempt to reach out to them so that they can then eventually take the spiritual path. But the spiritual path begins at this stage that is mentioned here.
السير إلى الله معناه أن الإنسان قرر أن يسير إلى الله، فذهب إلى أستاذ أو شيخ أو من يأخذ بيده ليدله كيف يصل إلى الله. إذن هو قد قرر، فهو مستعد لأن يعمل.
That the whole meaning of wayfaring, traveling on a path to Allah, means that you've made a conscious decision to do so, such that you've gone to a teacher and you've made that conscious decision, you're ready to act.
أما مسألة تأليف الناس ليقبلوا ليتخذوا قرار الإقبال على الله فليس هذا الذي نتحدث عنه، هذا موضوع آخر. ولا يعد من يعامل بهذه المعاملة التأليفية مريدا سالكا إلى الله، لا، هذا يعتبر مؤلفا ليقبل أصلا على الله. هذا شارد يراد به أن يرد.
That as for attempting to bring people's hearts close and making them desire to want to take a path to Allah Ta'ala, that these type of things, this is all in the realm of da'wah. He's not yet at the stage where they are seriously going to take the spiritual path.
وإن أخذ صورة المريد كما يحصل عند البعض من الأشياخ يعني يتسع يقبل حتى هؤلاء النافرين ليؤلفهم، لكن ليسوا بمريدين حقيقيين. المريد من قرر أن يسير إلى الله، أراد الله. ما معنى كلمة مريد؟ أراد، أي أراد الله وتوجه بعزم بقوة.
That even if the sheikh accepts these type of people and helps to try to bring them in and to make things easy for them so that they can then take the spiritual path, that person in that state is not yet a murid. He's not an aspirant yet or a disciple. That murid comes from the verb arad, which means to want something, meaning that they've made a definitive decision then to travel the path.
أما من قرر تزكية نفسه والسير إلى الله عز وجل وتحسين أخلاقه فهذه الطريقة، أولا الواجبات وترك المحرمات.
And that they've actually decided to refine their character and to fulfill the obligatory acts. This is the very first step of the spiritual path, is to fulfill the obligations and leave the prohibitions.
فإذا تزين ظاهرا بالعبادات وتطهر عن المعاصي الظاهرة انتقل إلى باطنه ليتفطن لأخلاق وأمراض قلبه.
And so that as the disciple becomes outwardly adorned by acts of devotion and is purified from outward sins, the master moves onto the disciple's inward in order to bring him to awareness of his character and the maladies of his heart.
هذه مسألة مهمة قبل الانتقال إلى تطهير باطن القلب، أنه لا يصلح للسير إلى الله من يجهل ما يجب عليه معرفته من دين الله.
So this is another important issue, is that then he moves from that to focus upon the inward. He moves on. So the first and most important is the outward element of law.
ولهذا قالوا ما اتخذ الله من ولي جاهل ولو اتخذه لعلمه.
And this is why it has been said that Allah has never taken an ignorant person as one of his friends, as a wali, and that were he to have taken him, that he would surely have taught him.
والمقصود بالجاهل هنا الجاهل بما يجب عليه تجاه ربه.
And what is meant here by ignorance is that what is required of him, the things that are required of him to know in relation to his Lord.
ثم ينتقل الشيخ بعد تكميل ظاهر المريد بالفعل للواجبات وترك المحرمات إلى العمل على نفسه على باطنه.
And then that the sheikh moves on after helping them leave outward sins to focusing upon the inward state of their heart.
فيتدرج في تخليصه من العلل الباطنة ويراعيه في ذلك.
He gradually works on getting rid of the disciples' inward maladies and manages him through the process.
وهنا البعض يتساءل يقول كيف يقدم هنا الظاهر على الباطن، مع أن الأصل باطن الإنسان، أن الله لا ينظر إلى صوركم ولا إلى أجسامكم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم.
So someone might ask at this point that how could we focus upon the outward before the inward when the inward is the foundation? And he quoted the hadith, indeed Allah doesn't look to your physical bodies or your outward appearance, but he looks to your hearts.
أليس هذا السؤال واردا؟
That someone might ask this question, right?
الجواب أن الظاهر يؤثر في الباطن.
The answer is that the outward impacts the inward.
الأصل الباطن.
The foundation is the inward.
هذا واضح أن الله لا ينظر إلى صوركم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم. هذا جلي.
This is clear from the hadith that we quoted, that the place that Allah looks is the heart.
لن ينال الله لحومها ولا دماء ولكن يناله التقوى منكم.
And so that, as the verse states, that the meats and the blood is not what reaches Allah, but it's the taqwa, it's your piety that reaches Him.
لكن جعل الله سنة في تركيبة الإنسان قائمة.
That Allah has a sunnah in the way that He made our physical bodies.
في شيء لا يتغير.
It's something that never changes.
أن الباطن يتأثر بالظاهر.
And that the inward is impacted by the outward.
الأساس هو الباطن لكنه يتأثر بالظاهر.
That the foundation is the inward, but it's impacted by the outward.
والظاهر مثاله مثال المنافذ والأسوار على الباطن.
And that the outward is like a window into the inward.
والأسوار.
And ours is like a window and a fence or gate.
أيضا مثاله مثال الأوعية للباطن.
And the outward is like a container for the inward.
العين وما تنظر هذه نافذة.
That the eye and how it looks, it's a window.
الأذن وما تسمع نافذة.
The ear and what it hears is a window.
هذه النافذة مباشرة الصلة بالقلب.
That both of these windows have a direct connection to the heart.
فمن أطلق لعينه العنان بأن تنظر إلى ما لا ينبغي النظر إليه تلوث قلبه.
And so he who looks at what they're not supposed to look at, then it has a direct effect and his heart becomes dirtied.
لهذا قال الله قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم.
And this is why Allah said that say to the believers that lower your gaze.
وقال أيضا قل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن.
And He said and say to the female believers to lower their gaze.
وقال يعلم خائنة الأعين.
And He says that He knows the treachery of the eyes.
وما تخفي الصدور.
And that which the breasts conceal.
وقال صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم النظرة سهم مسموم من سهام إبليس.
And that our Prophet ﷺ said that a gaze is a poisoned arrow from the arrows of Iblis.
لهذا قالوا كل شيء تنظر منه تنطبع منه صورة في قلبك. كل شيء تنظر إليه تنطبع منه صورة في قلبك إن خيرا فخير وإن شرا فشر.
This is why they say that anything that you look at, that its image is reflected in the heart. If it's good, then good, and then if it's evil, then evil.
والجسد الظاهر هذا وعاء للروح وللقلب وللنفس وللعقل الذي تكلمنا عنهم في الدرس الماضي.
And the physical body is a container of the heart, the spirit, and soul, and the intellect that we spoke about last class.
فإذا قمت تصلي بجسدك,
such that if you stand up and physically pray,
فالمقصود من ذلك أن يقوم هذا الوعاء بما فيه إلى الصلاة.
The whole point of that is that you stand up with your physical body and everything that it contains and use that for prayer.
عقلك وروحك وقلبك ونفسك.
Your intellect, your heart, your spirit, your soul.
لكن لا يتأتى أن تقوم روحك إلى الصلاة، يقوم روحك إلى الصلاة وجسدك لا يصلي.
It's not possible for you to stand up and pray with your ruh, with your spirit, if your physical body doesn't stand up.
الصلاة ليست فقط تفكر.
That prayer is not just reflection.
ولهذا اهتم بالظاهر.
And this is why that they were always concerned with the outward.
إذا قمت وصليت حملت نفسك إلى الله عز وجل.
That if you stand up and pray, that you've carried yourself to Allah.
كأنك تقول للحق سبحانه وتعالى هذا الوعاء بما فيه قد أوقفته بين يديك.
As if you're saying to your Lord that this container and everything in it, that I have put it before you.
وإذا التزمت عدم النظر إلى الحرام أو مقارفة الحرام أو أكل المال الحرام فقد التزمت أن تحمي باطنك وداخلك روحك وقلبك وسرك بأسوار حصينة.
And that if you prevent yourself from looking at impermissible gazes, things, and that you prevent yourself from attaining unlawful wealth, is that you've set up a wall that will protect your heart.
بالمناسبة إذا سمعتم من يتكلم عن النظر الحرام ليس الكلام عن النظر الحرام محصورا فقط عن النظر بشهوة إلى الجنس الآخر.
And that when he also wanted to mention that when we talk about an unlawful gaze, that it doesn't only mean that you look at the opposite sex in an unlawful way.
لا الحديث عن النظر الحرام له ثلاثة أنواع. النظر الحرام ثلاثة.
That there's three types of unlawful gazes.
أولها هذا النظر إلى ما لا يجوز النظر إليه مما له صلة بشهوة الجسد.
That the first is that which is unlawful to look at, which relates to a desire of looking at someone's.
وثانيها النظر إلى الدنيا بعين التعظيم.
The second is looking at the world and magnifying in a gaze of magnification.
يعني المقصود هنا التعظيم لما حقر الله من الفانيات، ليس المقصود إجلال عظمة خلق الله للدنيا.
And what it means now is that looking at what Allah Ta'ala has belittled from the perishing things of this world, not looking at the creation and using it as a way to reflect.
النوع الثالث النظر إلى أحد من الخلق بعين الاحتقار.
The third type of unlawful gaze is looking at one of Allah's creation and belittling them.
لو كان مذنبا.
Even if they're sinful sinners.
لو كان من أهل الكبائر فاسقا.
Even if they are legally corrupt and commit major wrong actions. Even if they're non-Muslims.
لا يجوز احتقار أحد مما خلق الله.
It's not permissible to belittle what Allah has created.
فالنظر بعين الكبر أشد حرمة حتى من النظر بعين الشهوة.
That looking with the eye of pride and arrogance is even more sinful than looking with desire.
هذا عابد بني إسرائيل الذي لم يعصي الله قط، أحبط الله جميع حسناته لأنه نظر إلى فاسق بني إسرائيل الذي لم يطع الله قط، نظر إليه بعين الكبر باحتقار.
That the worshipper from the Israelites, that he was worshipped Allah Ta'ala for an extended period of time, but then he looked at a sinful servant of Allah and despised him. And then Allah Ta'ala that nullified all of his actions.
التقى الاثنان أحدهما نازل من خلوته والثاني صاعد من الساحل.
That two of them met, that one of them came from his place of worship.
أعرض كل منهما عن الآخر، تجنب الآخر.
And the other one was coming from another place, and they turned away from each other.
العابد تجنب الفاسق تكبرا، انظر هذا لن يغفر الله له، هذا فاسق، وأعرض عنه.
The worshipper walked away from the sinful person, said that, I don't want to get close to this person, he's sinful.
والفاسق أعرض حياء، قال من أنا حتى أقابل هذا الصالح، ليس لي وجه حتى أقابله، استحى فأعرض.
The sinful person turned away out of shyness.
كسر قلبه يعني.
That he was shy and humble at the moment, saying that I don't want to pass. Who am I to walk past this righteous person?
هذا العابد من كثرة عبادته كانت له كرامة، كان يمشي وتظله سحابة.
That's this worshipper that he used to worship so often that Allah granted him a saintly miracle that he used to be covered by clouds when he walked.
عندما التقيا وكانت السحابة تظل العابد، فلما أعرض العابد تكبرا وأعرض الفاسق حياء وتواضعا وتجاوز كل منهما الآخر، السحابة تحولت عن العابد إلى الفاسق وصارت تظل الفاسق في مشيه.
So before they met, that this cloud was covering the worshipper, and when they met, and that he was arrogant in this moment, and then that this sinful person was humble and was shy, that as they parted, that the cloud started to cover the sinful person.
سبحان الله. فهي ثلاثة أنواع النظر المحرمة، لا نتكلم فقط عن نوع واحد.
So there's three different types of unlawful gazes, not just one.
يقول هنا فيتدرج في تخليصه من العلل الباطنة ويراعيه في ذلك.
He gradually works on getting rid of the disciple's inward maladies and manages him through this process.
ومن لطائف الرياضة إذا كان المريد لا يسخو بترك الرعونة رأسا أو صفة أخرى لم يسمح بضدها دفعة فينقله من خلق مذموم إلى آخر أخف منه، كما يرغب الصبي في المكتب باللعب والكرة ثم ينقل إلى الزينة وفاخر الثياب ثم ينقل إلى الرئاسة وطلب الجاه ثم ينقل بالترغيب في الآخرة.
So one of the subtleties of spiritual training is that if the disciple cannot bring himself to leave a wayward attribute to one that is less blameworthy, in a manner similar to how a child is attracted to learning through toys and ball games and then moves on to ornaments and nice garments, and then moves on to seeking leadership in a place of influence, and then moves on to seeking the afterlife.
هذا منهج يقول الإمام الغزالي في موضع آخر من الإحياء وقد تعالج الأهواء بأهواء.
And so this is a methodology, and Imam Ghazali says in another part of the Ihya that you might treat a certain aspect of one's passions with other passions or desires they have.
يعني مثلا الإنسان يحب الفخر والظهور والمباهاة، هذا موجود في النفس الأمارة بالسوء.
So, for instance, someone likes to boast, he likes to be known, and that this is a part of the nafs that calls to evil.
فتجد في ترغيبه في فعل الخير وترهيبه من فعل الشر يذكر له أن من فعل كذا يأتي يوم القيامة أمام الناس ويقال فليقم فلان ويقوم وله كرامة ومكانة. هذا لا يزال مرتبط بالعزة والبروز.
So that it will be mentioned to them an individual that comes on the day of judgment, that they will have this great rank and status.
هذا نوع من المعالجة بشيء له علاقة بهوى الإنسان.
So this is a type of treatment that relates to one's own desires.
لكن الذي حصل أنه نقل من الاستسلام لهذا الهوى في الدنيا إلى طلبه في الآخرة.
And that what happened was it was treated, and he became free from it by that transferring it to something that relates to the next world.
هذا الذي حصل.
That this is what happened. This is what happened.
معالجة للهوى بهوى.
So that it's treating one's desires with other desires.
وحكي عن بعضهم أنه يعود نفسه الحلم.
There was a story one man who wanted to habituate himself to forbearance, hilm.
فكان يستأجر من يشتمه على ملأ من الناس ويكلف نفسه الصبر وكظم الغيظ.
So he would pay someone to denigrate him in public, and he would exert himself in being patient and withholding his anger until forbearance became normal for him.
حتى صار الحلم عادة له.
Until forbearance became normal for him.
بحيث كان يضرب به المثل.
He was later used as an example of forbearance.
كان بالعرب قديما يقولون وداويها بالتي كانت هي الداء.
And that the Arabs used to say that treat the sickness with the very sickness itself.
وهنا الإمام الغزالي لا يريد منا أن نستأجر من يسبنا حتى نكون على حلم.
Imam Ghazali is not saying that we should go hire someone to insult us publicly.
الكلام هنا عن أن هناك وسائل تتخذ لحمل النفس على التغير.
What Imam Ghazali is saying here is that there's different ways that can be used to force yourself to change.
وهذه مسألة مهمة عندما تقرؤون كتب السلوك ينبغي أن تتنبهوا لها.
And this is a very important issue when you read books that relate to the spiritual path.
هناك فرق بين أن يقول لك المصنف أو العالم الرباني أن يقول لك افعل كذا لتصل إلى كذا وبين أن يقول لك وهناك من فعل كذا ليصل إلى كذا.
There's a difference between a particular individual that tells you do this so that you may attain that, and between someone who says that previously people used to do this to attain that. There's a difference.
عندما تنقل لنا كتب التراجم الثابتة المعتمدة أن إمام التابعين سيدنا أويس بن عامر القرني كان يلتقط الطعام من المزابل وينظفه فيأكل منه ويعطي الفقراء الذين لا يجدون الطعام ويبكي ويقول اللهم لا تؤاخذني بمن بات جائعا من أمة محمد، استشعارا وتواضعا وانكسارا، وأنه نبحه كلب فقال لا تؤذيني ولا أؤذيك، آكل مما يليني وتأكل مما يليك، فإن أنا دخلت الجنة واجتزت الصراط فأنا خير منك، وإن أنا سقطت في النار فأنت خير مني. هذا مثال راقي للمعاملة، ليس معناه اذهبوا وكلوا من المزابل.
So when we read the story in our authoritative collections, in our biographical dictionaries of the Sayyid of the Tabi'in, Uwais al-Qarni, and one of the things that he used to do is that he used to go to dumpsters and he used to get pieces of bread that were left, and that he would gather them together and that he would feed the poor with these remaining pieces of bread, and then he would weep to his Lord and say that, oh Allah, don't take me to account for the poor, for not feeding the poor amongst the Prophet's ummah. And he says at the same time that he would, at times, there would be a dog at the other side of the dumpster, and he would have a conversation with it and say that, you eat from your side of the dumpster and I'll eat from my side, and that if I pass over the traverse that goes over hell, then I'm better than you, and that if I fall in that you're actually better than me. It doesn't mean when you hear these stories that this is encouraging you to go out and do the same thing.
لكن هذا لفت نظر إلى كيف كانت الناس الراقية التي تعتني بشأن باطنها إلى أي حد يمكن أن تتصرف لحماية باطنها، لرقي باطنها مع الله عز وجل. The
meaning behind these stories is to learn the incredible degree to which people we used to do certain things in order to protect their heart and to purify it.
هذا رجل لم يقابل رسول الله لكن النبي مدحه وقال لعمر وعلي إن أنتما لقيتما فاسألا أن يستغفر لكما يغفر الله لكما.
This man never met the Prophet, but despite that he commanded Ali and Omar to go meet him, and that he told them that if you find him and meet him, ask him to seek forgiveness for you,
يغفر الله لكما.
and then Allah will forgive you.
ولما سأل عنه عمر في آخر سنة من حياته وجد قومه يعتبرونه مغفلا أو مجنونا أو أحمقا لا يلتفت إليه لا يؤبه له.
And then when Sayyidina Umar found him towards the end of his life, that they found that his people, the people of Uwais al-Qarni, didn't consider him, significant person. They thought he was insane. That they thought he was just, just someone crazy. Just someone that was just, idiot.
يقول من لا نعلم أويس نرفع لك يا أمير المؤمنين إلا رجل به حمق عندنا تركناه على إبل يرعاها لنا.
So when he was asking about him, his people said to Umar that who is Uwais? That all we know him is just some fool that we just left to take care of our camels.
لا يستحق أن يرفع لك.
That he doesn't even deserve that we present him to you.
قال سيدنا عمر بك لا به يعني الحمق.
That Sayyidina Umar said to this individual, you were the fool, not him.
هذا رجل النبي ذكره صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل أن يلتقي به ولم يلتقي به.
He said this is a man that the Prophet himself mentioned, even without having, even though that he didn't actually meet the Prophet.
يشفع في مثل ربيعة ومضر يوم القيامة.
And that the Prophet informed that he will intercede for an amount of people like the vast tribes of Rabi' and Mudar on the Day of Judgment, which are two of the greatest, most numerous tribes of the Arab.
انظروا منزلة رجل عند الله أنه سيشفعه في أناس بعدد ربيعة ومضر. هذا نفسه الذي هذا منزلته عند الله قومه ينظرون إليه على أنه الأحمق الأهبل الغبي الذي لا يلتفت إليه.
So look at this individual who's going to intercede for so many people, like the number of people from the tribe of Rabi' and Mudar, that this is his state with his Lord. But look at the way that his people looked at him.
ثم عندما نذكر قصة من قصصه نجد أيضا من يسخر من هذا الفعل الذي كان يفعله.
And then likewise we find that when we mention his stories, that people ridicule the things that he used to do.
تعرفون؟
He says, do you know this?
هي نفس المشكلة التي جعلت قومه يتهمونه بالغفالة والحمق والجنون. هي نفس المرض الذي في نفوس أولئك هو نفسه في نفوس مرضى اليوم الذين يسخرون من كونه يذهب إلى المزبلة ويلقط الكسر المرمية وينظفها ويأكل منها ويعطيها للفقراء وللمساكين.
That the same disease that was in the hearts of his people who mistreated him and made them look at him like he was someone that was insane is the same disease that's in the hearts of those people who hear his story and hear about what he used to do and to take bread from the dumpsters or eat or and so forth. It's the same disease.
الإنسان بلغ به من الحال مع الله والمراقبة لله أن لا يرى نفسه أفضل من الكلب.
That a person reached a state where they were in a state of vigilance, realizing Allah sees them, and he had a state with his Lord such that he didn't see himself as better than a dog.
يقول للكلب إن أنا سقطت في النار من على الصراط ولم أدخل الجنة أنت ستكون أفضل مني لأن الكلاب لا تذهب إلى النار.
That he said to the dog that if I fall into the fire and that I don't pass the traverse, that you are better than me because dogs don't enter into the fire.
وإن أنا تجاوزت ودخلت الجنة فأنا خير منك لأن الكلاب لن تكون في الجنة.
And that if I pass the traverse and enter into paradise, that I'm better than you because dogs don't enter into paradise.
الذي ينظر بهذا المستوى الراقي من التواضع والأدب مع الله في المعاملة مع الخالق كيف يتحول هذا السلوك إلى محل السخرية.
That there's someone who looks at things in this reality and has reached this lofty way of perceiving things. How could it be that people then confuse this and think that they're insane?
يؤكد حاجتنا إلى تهذيب النفوس.
That this only emphasizes our need to refine our character.
إذا لما نسمع مثل هذه الوسائل التي يذكرونها إذا لم يقولوا افعلوا كذا فهي خيارات تختلف مناسبتها من شخص إلى شخص وعصر إلى عصر ومكان إلى مكان.
So he's giving us a principle that when we hear these type of stories where that we're not being told do such and such a thing, that we understand that these are stories of people in the past in a particular times and circumstances, and we understand it as such.
لكن نأخذ العبرة من أن تهذيب النفس يحتاج إلى تفنن في الأساليب.
And that we understand, we learn a lesson that to travel the path and purify ourselves, that there's a number of different mechanisms that we have to learn to do this.
ولهذا قال في شخص كان متضايق من أنه لا يستطيع أن يحلم، دائما سريع الغضب، يجهل على الناس إذا استفزوه، فتعمد أن يستأجر من يسبه ويتكلم عليه حتى يدرب نفسه على الحلم.
And so that there, we hear this story about this man that his anger kept overcoming him. He didn't have the ability to be forbearing, so that he actually hired someone to then insult him in public so that he could teach himself.
واستشعر بعضهم في نفسه الجبن فأراد تحصيل خلق الشجاعة فكان يركب البحر في الشتاء عند اضطراب الأمواج.
Another person felt that he was cowardly and wanted to become more courageous, so he would sail out into the sea during the winter months when the water was tumultuous.
يقول هنا الغزالي المقصود من هذين المثلين فالطريق الكلي السلوك مسلك المضاد لما تهواه النفس وتميل إليه.
So Imam Ghazali then is going to explain the whole purpose of all these things. So the whole path is about doing these things against what the ego desires and inclines towards.
وقد جمع الله ذلك كله في كلمة واحدة. دليل.
And God has encapsulated that in one word when He revealed, he's bringing the proof.
فقال وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى. ونهى النفس.
Allah says, whoever fears the standing before his Lord and prevents his soul its whim, for him heaven shall be the place of resort. But you notice here it says that he prevents his soul its whim.
يقول الإمام البوصيري رحمه الله وخالف النفس والشيطان وعصيهما وإنهما محضاك النصح فاتهمي.
And that Imam Busiri says that and go against what your soul and the whisperings of shaitan, even if they appear to give you sincere advice, that you should be wary.
ثم ختم الإمام هذا الفصل بأصل مهم جدا.
Then Imam Ghazali concludes this chapter with a very important foundational principle.
يقول والأصل المهم في المجاهدة الوفاء بالعزم.
The most important principle in spiritual struggle is to be loyal to one's resolve.
بمعنى أنك إذا عزمت على شيء مع نفسك في تهذيبها فينبغي أن تفي بهذا الشيء ولو تكلفت ولو كان ثقيلا. لا تعود نفسك نقض العزائم.
Meaning that if you resolve to do something to purify your soul, that you should definitely implement it, even if it's difficult, even if you have to force yourself to do it. You don't want to get used to breaking your resolve.
هذه قاعدة مهمة جدا، مبدأ أساسي في تهذيب النفس.
This is an extremely important principle. This is a foundational principle that we should write.
يكتب في الأوراق ويكتب في العقول ويكتب في القلوب.
It should be written on paper in our minds and in our hearts.
يقول الأصل المهم في المجاهدة الوفاء بالعزم.
The most important principle in spiritual struggle is to be loyal to one's resolve.
وقد يتيسر أسباب ما عزم على تركه فليصبر ويستمر.
Things can come in the way to make one want to leave the resolve, but no one should be patient and persevere.
عزمت أن تترك شيء ثم جاءت فرصة أن تعمله. اصبر اثبت هذا اختبار.
So that you resolve to not do something, and then it comes to you such that you can do it, that you should be patient and avoid doing it.
فإن من عود نفسه هذه حكمة. فإن من عود نفسه ترك العزم ألفت ذلك ففسدت.
Because whomever gets used to leaving his resolve will find that it becomes a habit, and that which will spoil things for him.
هذه مضطردة القاعدة. من عود نفسه ترك العزائم ألفت ذلك ففسدت. لأنها ستعتاد كلما أراد أن يحملها على شيء تقول هو الآن متحمس حضر الدروس والمجالس وعزم نخليه شوي يهدى أنقض معه العزيمة. لكن لو عودها أنه لو أمرها بشيء لا يقبل التراجع عنه ما دام حقا ستتعلم أن تلتزم معه. هكذا النفس.
So that this is a principle, and that we find that if we get used to leaving our resolve, Well, when that happens, every time they want to attend a class, for instance, and then we don't do it, or we have resolve and then we go against it, that your nafs will know this, and it will come at you to get you to leave all different types of things. So when we have a resolve to do something, then we have to put it into action and follow up on it.
رزقنا الله وإياكم العمل.
He asks that may Allah grant us action with what we're learning.
عندنا فرصة لسؤال أو سؤالين. تفضل.
جزاكم الله خيرا أستاذ. ما هو الفرق بين الفراسة وسوء الظن بالآخرين؟
You want to say it in English?
Well, I mean, in English term, probably it's one term. How do you distinguish between when you have insight into people, like this is a good person or bad, and also when you have bad presumption? Well, I mean, you might think this is a bad person because you're intuitive, but it's a bad presumption. How can you tell?
الفراسة هي من شأن القلب المنور وسوء الظن من شأن النفس الأمارة بالسوء.
So he's asking the difference between intuition and having a bad opinion of someone. He said that intuition comes from a heart that is enlightened, and that a bad opinion comes from the evil of the lower self.
الفراسة تكون مبنية على تبصر وسوء الظن مبني على مرض في النفس.
And so that firasa, which is an inner sight, is built upon a heart that perceives things, whereas that a bad opinion of others is built upon a disease in the heart.
الفراسة إما أن تكون من قبيل الكشف وصاحب الكشف يعلم أن هذا كشف، وإما أن تكون من قبيل التبصر المبني على الأدلة القرائن.
So that a inner sight is either related to kashf, unveiling, and the person has something unveiled to them sees it, or it's related to a type of intuition and insight that there's some other proofs that point to it.
أما سوء الظن فهو مبني على التخرصات.
That as for bad opinions of others, it's built upon تخرصات يعني
الاحتمالات غير المبنية على حقائق أو على وقائع أو على مؤشرات.
So it's built upon just mere possibilities or illusions, supposition.
أذن لنا بأن نحترز بسوء الظن في مسألة المعاملات المادية.
So that su of dhan, having you could probably translate it as not, having a bad opinion, it has its place in interactions.
والمقصود هنا بسوء الظن أي الاحتراز، أخذ الاحتياطات.
So what is meant here by having a bad opinion is really being cautious, that you don't expect people to
بيع شراء، وثق بعقود بشهود، اعمل دراسة، لا تسلمها بحسن ظن هكذا، لا، في حدود المعاملات لا يستخدم حسن الظن.
That when you buy and sell and writing things down and so forth, that you don't expect the other party is going to, no, you build it upon the opposite.
والحكمة من ذلك ليست فقط الحفاظ على المال والحقوق، هناك حكمة أخرى وهي الحفاظ على حقيقة حسن الظن في القلب، جوهر حسن الظن.
And that the wisdom is not only to preserve those contracts that you have and so forth, but it's also related to preserving your good opinion in your heart as well.
إن الذي يعامل الناس بدون احتراز في الأمور المادية سيصطدم مرة ومرتين وثلاثة بمن يكذب عليه ويخدعه ويغش ويسرق ويخونه، فيتراكم ذلك في نفسه فيتحول إلى سوء الظن بكل من حواليه، لا يستطيع أن يحسن الظن بالعباد.
Because if you're not careful in these monetary interactions and so forth, that what you'll find is that so-and-so will deceive you, so-and-so will cheat you, so-and-so will do these different things to you. So you've had a bad experience several times, and then it will lead you to having a bad opinion with a lot of others.
تتعلق بالحقوق لا يغلب فيها دائما حسن الظن.
As for other things that don't relate to rights, is that you relate to just a person's intentions and so forth, you always have a good opinion.
ولا يخيب صاحب حسن الظن حتى لو كان في غير أهله.
And that you never lose if you have a good opinion, even if you're wrong in the way that you think.
سيدي عبد الوهاب الشعراني رحمه الله يقول: وصلت إلى حالة صرت إذا دخل عندي أحد يعني يكشف لي ما كان يفعل من أشياء سيئة أراها أمامي.
That Sidi Abdul Wahab al-Sha'rani said that I reached a state with my Lord that someone will come into my presence and I will see, what they've done.
قال فطلبت من الله أن يحجب عني ذلك.
That I asked Allah to veil me from that.
قال حتى لا أفقد حسن الظن بالخلق. بدأت أشعر أني ما عاد صرت حسن الظن بأحد.
So that I won't lose having a good opinion of people, because I reached a state where I was losing that.
لأن حسن الظن قيمة عالية.
Because having a good opinion has a great worth.
وربما كان ذلك من قبيل الاختبار له.
And that, no, عفوا.
ربما حصل له ذلك من قبيل الاختبار.
And that this might, that the righteous are tried. So this might have been this was a test for him.
سبحان الله. سيدنا عثمان بن عفان دخل عليه رجل من الأعراب كان في الطريق فنظر نظرة محرمة إلى عورة امرأة أو شيء من ذلك. فلما جلس أمام سيدنا عثمان تغيظ سيدنا عثمان وقال يزني أحدكم بعينه ثم يأتي إلى مجلسنا.
And Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan, that there was one of the desert Bedouins that when he came to visit him, that he had an unlawful gaze where he looked at the nakedness of a woman on the way, and when he came into the presence of Sayyidina Uthman, that he got angry and said that is one of you going to come into my presence and the traces of fornication is on their eyes.
فخاف الرجل أوحي بعد رسول الله. هذا الأعرابي البدوي ذعر.
That the man was scared, and he said, is this revelation after the messenger of Allah?
قال لا ولكنها الفراسة اتقوا فراسة المؤمن فإنه ينظر بنور الله.
He said, no, but this is firasa, this is inner sight, and that beware of the inner sight of a believer because he looks with the light of Allah.
الحديث القدسي الذي في البخاري يعني حتى ولا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل بعد أداء الفرائض حتى أحبه فإذا أحببته كنت عينه التي يبصر بها.
And then in the divine saying it says that that my servant will draw near to me with nothing better than that which I've made incumbent upon him. He will continue drawing near to me with the supererogatory until I love him. But then it says, and then I will be the eye through which he sees.
وسمعه الذي يسمع به كنت بصره الذي يبصر به ليس عينه كنت بصره الذي يبصر به وسمعه الذي يسمع به ويده التي يبطش بها ورجله التي يمشي بها رب العزة يقول ذلك.
I will be the sight through which he sees, the ear through which he hears, the hand through which he seizes, and the feet through which he walks. And this is the Lord of Might who is saying this.
سبحان الله. نعم. آخر سؤال.
So one more question.
هذا حريص يجلس في الصف الأول كل يوم.
Hi. If someone cares what others think but doesn't base everything on it, would they be considered to be worshiping the metaphorical idol that would they be considered to be dependent on what others think, like what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I can. فهو يقول إذا إنسان يعني يهمه يعني ما يعتقد الناس فيه لكن هو لا يبني يعني أعماله على ذلك فهو يعني يهتم بما يرون الناس لكن هو ما ليس إلى الحد أنه يؤثر في يعني نياته. هل هذا مذموم أو؟
أعجبني هذا السؤال كثيرا.
He says that he's very impressed by your question.
بارك الله فيك.
God bless you.
لا يقال أنه مذموم بإطلاقه أبدا ما دام لا يؤثر على قراراته.
So that caring about what people think, that you can never say it's unconditionally blameworthy as long as it's not affecting your decision-making process and why you do things.
ما دام لا يؤثر على طريقة تفكيره.
As long as it doesn't affect the way that you think.
لكن ينبغي الإنسان أن يكون حذرا لسبب.
But we have to be aware for a particular reason.
لأن النفس من طبيعتها الخديعة والغش.
Because your nafs, that by its nature, that it deceives you and it cheats you.
وعندما تتعلم كيف تفتش عليها ستكتشف أنها تغير كثيرا من القرارات بناء على الخوف على منزلتها عند الخلق وتوهمك أنها لا تتأثر.
And that your nafs will delude you into thinking that in many cases, scenarios, that it's not affecting the way that you're thinking. And when reality, that there's many things that it's trying to get you to do in order that you don't lose, or that in order that people think about you in a certain way.
والحل بأن تشتغل على قتل أو على تهذيب وإضعاف حب المنزلة لدى الناس في قلبك.
And the solution to that is that you work to weaken the desire that you have in your heart to be known and have a rank in people's hearts.
وتتصرف فيما يتعلق بسؤالك بما يتناسب مع هذا الموضوع. أنت هدفك أن تخلص نفسك من حب المنزلة. ماذا سيترتب على الوصول إلى هذا الهدف؟ هل أراعي نظر الناس لي؟ هل لا أراعي نظر الناس لي؟ هذه قضية تكون تابعة، ليست هي الأصل. الأصل أنا أحارب هذه الصفة في نفسي حتى لا أحرم الإخلاص. هل يقتضي ذلك أن لا أبالي بالناس أحيانا بدون أن أجرح أحد وسيلة؟ ممكن. يقتضي أن أفعل أشياء ربما تكون عند الناس غير مستحسنة وهي ليست سيئة في حقيقتها؟ ممكن. يقتضي لا أن أتلطف؟ ممكن. هذه وسائل. المهم أن يكون التركيز على تخليص القلب من الالتفات إلى منزلتي عند الناس. لأن هذا لب الرياء.
So he said that the most important thing is that in your decision-making process is that the most important thing is that you focus upon wanting to rid yourself of this problem, right? And that ultimately that your nafs can deceive you, and that you don't want it to deceive you and to do it. You focus upon that, and then that you have to look that to what extent that you take into consideration what people think of you. So at times that you just don't care at all, and then at other times that you might need to care. But the most important thing is that you focus upon the deceiving nature of your soul and purifying that, and that's the foundation. And then that you'll learn how to navigate it from there.
هذا لا تمر دعواها بأنها لا تتأثر في قراراتها بنظر الناس وتصدقها وتمشي. لا، انظر في الموضوع.
And so that you have to look carefully into it. Don't always believe it that you don't really care about what people think, and so you have to look into it carefully.
نفذ الوقت.
It's time out.
بارك الله فيكم. رزقنا الله وإياكم الصدق. سامحونا الذين في المؤخرة ما أعطيناكم الوقت ضاق علينا. أسأل الله أن يرزقنا وإياكم الصدق. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها. اللهم تب علينا توبة نصوحة طهرنا بها جسما وقلبا وروحا. أقبل على مقبلنا بما أمل وعلى معرضنا بواسع الجود والفضل يا واسع الجود والفضل. كلنا بما كنت به للمحبوبين واسلك بنا مسالك المحبوبين. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم فرج عن الأمة واكشف الغمة وادفع كل ظلمة ومظلمة ومدلهمة وردنا والمسلمين إليك مردا جميلا. اللهم عجل لهذه الأمة بأمر رشد يعز فيه أهل طاعتك ويتاب فيه على أهل معصيتك ونكفى به من لم تسبق لهم سوابق التوبة. يا أكرم الأكرمين ويا أرحم الراحمين. وفر حظنا من هذه الجمعة ومن الصلاة على حبيبك صلى الله عليه وسلم. وافتح لنا في أسرار سورة الكهف واجعلنا ممن تستجاب دعوتهم يا حي يا قيوم. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة. الحمد لله.
So we apologize for not getting to the questions for the people in the back.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Just a couple announcements. Firstly, Dr. Umar's session will be starting at 10 a.m. We ask you guys to please be seated before 10 a.m. so that we can start timely. Secondly, Jummah is going to be in the concert hall all the way across this hall through the double doors during your lunch break. Jazakallah khair.